Hello, William. Why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about your relationship with agriculture and why you're kind of qualified to talk a little bit about agriculture?
Oh, that's pretty funny. I don't know. I think I am qualified, but 52 years old. I've been farming my entire life. I've worked in the corn and soybean fields of Missouri, the cattle operations of the western United States. I worked for a veterinarian for 7 years doing large animal work, mostly cattle and hogs. I worked for the largest hog farm in the country, which was Smithfield, for a number of years, breeding sows, doing artificial insemination. I started, I think I'd have to count, but I think 6 different farms where they were direct farm to consumer farms. So we had CSAs and other models, farmers markets, just direct sales of different kinds. I've built 32 greenhouses in that time frame to raise an array of different kinds of fruits and vegetables. Most people would call them vegetables because they don't consider peppers and tomatoes a vegetable, or a fruit. But yeah, anyway, we had a CSA at one point for several years that had over 600 members. What else? Let me think. Jog my memory. You know some of this stuff.
What about your school stuff, like teaching about this?
Oh yeah,
The seminars.
I started a business teaching gardening and farming, self-development to help people be entrepreneurs. So a lot of entrepreneurship stuff to promote the whole idea of solving one of the biggest problems in society, which is poverty. So I love the line. I didn't make it up. I heard it and just thought it was funny, so I say it all the time. The best way to solve poverty is to get rich, and the average entrepreneur is a millionaire. So that's pretty awesome. And so I really like small, successful businesses that don't stress everybody out. My own education, I went to horticulture school in Northwest Missouri. I studied at Cornell. I've taken a lot of other short courses around the country on different subjects: aquaponics, hydroponics. What else have I done?
That's probably sufficient for the
I
thing,
don't know.
unless you want to keep going.
There's more. I just can't think of it. You caught me off guard.
No, it's all good. It's all good. Let me now that we have kind of established the foundational thing we've got in the mindset, let me ask you the main question we're going over here.
Okay.
The purpose of this discussion that we're going to be having is the following question. If we owe the future anything, what are our responsibilities from the perspective of agriculture?
Okay, wait a minute. If we owe the future anything, so is this a philosophical question?
It is somewhat. It is somewhat.
So can I say we don't owe the future and our conversation's over?
Well, you could.
Or
You
what?
could. You could. That'd be a quick end to the conversation, and I don't think that you agree with that. But maybe you do. I'd be, that.
Okay, ask the question. I'll try to stop being silly.
So, if we owe the future anything,
I think we probably do because, yeah, we need to pay things forward. It's important.
what are our responsibilities?
As far as agriculture goes.
This is from the agricultural and ecological perspective.
Oh, ecological. That reminds me of another thing. I do have a soil laboratory. I studied with Elaine Ingham, Dr. Christine Jones, Dr. David Johnson, others, all about ecology. And I've done a lot of different work in the regenerative space to help people understand that. I don't ever really teach anything unless it's practical. So it all comes back to the practical application. If it's going to work, then I will talk about it. If it's still speculation, I let other people either prove it or disprove it before I do anything with it. So this is a good question. Can you say it one more time?
Yes. If we owe the future anything, what are our responsibilities?
I think our responsibility is to get a very wide and deep education. So let me give you an example. I had a group of friends who were talking about current events, and we would discuss books. We're still doing it. We've been doing it for years. So once a month we have a Zoom call and we discuss different books. Somebody wanted to read the book by Glenn Beck. I forgot the name of it, but he was pretty wide on that book, but it only went a quarter of an inch deep. None of the subjects that he went into had any depth to them. Very, very frustrating, because he had some good points, but then he wouldn't tell you why or how, and so we couldn't really understand it. So I came away from that, reading that book, frustrated because he might have had something to offer, but the only people who are going to follow him are people who think very, very shallow. So we have to be able to know what it is that we're talking about if we're going to open our mouth. It has to actually work. It's one of the things, I don't know, a lot of people know a lot of stuff from college. I remember one thing from college, probably more than that, but I remember one thing that I think about at least once a week. And it was a plant science teacher, my first year of college. And he said, no, I can't remember. He said, when we open our mouth to speak, we need to actually know what we are talking about. And it was really good. He was teaching a bunch of freshmen. It's a good thing for a freshman to hear. And so I always try to base everything I teach on, does this actually work? And then if there's a good idea that we should be trying, I'm very clear on, and I say, we don't know if this works or not. There's no scientific research. There's no evidence base. There's no peer review on this one. But it would be an excellent thing to try. Here's a good experiment to go try. Go figure this one out. But as far, mostly what I try to promote are the things that we actually know. And then, and this goes right along with what you're asking, which is the next step. Once we actually know that something works, every time you try it, question it. Question it, question it, question it. I have a good friend, he's actually my medical doctor, and when he was in medical school, they told him, they said, okay, we're teaching you the very best that we know, but a lot of this is going to be wrong, and it is your job to figure out what is wrong as you're practicing. And I thought that was awesome advice, because as science, and there's a lot of ways to learn, and the modern world always says science as if it's the one way, which I don't like, but I'm going to say it right here anyway. As science progresses, we prove things that were true a decade ago wrong, because we learn more. And so that's very important. So as far as agriculture goes, we need to be doing the things to grow the most nutritious food possible in the healthiest soils possible, and creating soils and creating a very healthy ecology. And that's actually easier to do. I'm not going to use the word easy. I've made a mistake. It's simpler to do. I've been saying easy all my life, and I need to start changing that. There's nothing easy about agriculture. But it is simpler to do it in an ecological, healthy way than in an ecological unhealthy way. We have a better food product. We have healthier people because they're eating the healthier food. We have healthier landscapes, and we have healthier economies from those ecosystems. And this isn't just a good idea. I can show you a lot of examples of farms and ranches in many climates around the earth, and their economies are doing well, and they are not on welfare from the government. The Farm Bill is a disaster. It does produce a lot of food, and I think it's unhealthy food, but people don't starve to death because of it. So you got Norman Borlaug 100 years ago, who started the Green Revolution, which we could say was the chemical revolution or the corporate industrial complex, all the same thing. As far as I'm talking right now, it's the same thing. But what Norman Borlaug did is he basically stopped starvation. So it doesn't matter how poor you are in this country, you can still eat food. And there is a hunger problem, but that's usually a mental illness problem of why people are hungry. It's kind of like a homeless problem. It's probably a mental illness problem. So that can be debated, and I'm not an expert in those things, but it certainly looks like that as far as I can tell. So when it comes to agriculture, our responsibility to agriculture would be to focus on the thing that, what do I mean by thing? Focus on the method? It may be more than a method. I'm just going to go with method for lack of better vocabulary right now, but a focus on a method of agriculture that makes everything better and not just one thing. Because I can do it the Norman Borlaug way, and I can get a lot of food into a corporate system that stops mass hunger because there's just a lot of calories out there. But I have done it at a cost to the ecosystem and to local economies. The local economies all across the United States and other countries have died, and there are ghost towns all over where there used to be thriving small communities, and people have gone to the cities have got bigger, the countryside towns have become smaller or non-existent, and they've just dried up and died. There's a really fun documentary that came out a few years ago by a friend of mine, and not exactly a personal friend, but I mean we've had him on an interview on our podcast and so forth. But his name's Will Harris from Bluffton, Georgia, and the name of the documentary is 100,000 Beating Hearts, and he talks about some of these issues. Like he's one example of hundreds of farms that are growing food in such a method that everything is doing better. The local economies are doing better. Local jobs are happening. Profitability of the farm is working. There is a local food system, and the ecology is thriving, the wildlife is thriving, the soil is healthier. I say everything gets better. Part of this becomes a little bit philosophical, and I'll go into that. The fertilizer sales are down or non-existent. The pesticide sales are down or non-existent. The herbicide, the fungicide, the vaccines, the porons, a lot of these other products that are man-made corporate products, those sales are down on these kinds of farms. But see, philosophically, I think that's a win. I think that is a good thing, because those things have negative long-term effects, and we've been using them long enough now that we can show that, and there's no argument anymore. And if people are still arguing that, probably a fertilizer salesman.
So, quick question for you. That was awesome. I want to kind of pull back a little bit to the question and ask,
Sure.
Now that we understand a good idea of what you think our responsibilities are, could you quickly in like one or two sentences list us off like some bullet points from everything you talked about what you think, if you were just going to list out to somebody what their responsibilities are within agriculture or from the agricultural perspective, what would you say those responsibilities are?
Learn the thing that makes your farm profitable, and then do it. Learn the thing that helps your people. So here again, community, but maybe your family, your employees. Find out the thing that really benefits them, and then do those things. Am I answering this the way you were thinking?
Yeah, 100%. This is great.
I mean, did you want me to talk about some methods of farming?
I mean, if you think that that's relevant and that all people should be doing these methods to like, and those methods are what we owe, are like responsibilities that we have.
Yeah, we do. We need to get rid of all the chemicals, all of them. And I understand that water is a chemical, so I'm not an idiot here. But the man-made chemical world, we need to just stop using them. And I don't think we should stop using them today, but within a decade we should quit. In a decade there should be no more man-made fertilizers, no more man-made inputs going on the land, because we have the solid science of how to grow superior crops without that stuff. See, when Norman Borlaug came along, we didn't know how. A lot of people were doing it, but it was an accident. And we didn't know why sometimes it worked and why sometimes it didn't. And it goes back to Thomas Jefferson. He said it takes we clear a piece of forest and we can farm it for 15 years and then it dies, and we can't grow crops on it unless we put fertilizer on it. And at that point it was manure of some kind. They were either shipping in, manure from the cliffs of where the seabirds had been, or barnyard manure or whatever. But there was still that input, so it was based on inputs. I'm saying to base agriculture on no inputs, because we don't need to. But we are still mimicking Mother Nature. So we get a broad and deep education on understanding the rules of Mother Nature and never break them again. Everybody's worried about weeds. And then when I teach this, everybody says, "Oh, what about the weeds? All the weeds are going to take over." Well, you're ecologically illiterate. Weeds don't take over if you think that. You have been taught by a corporate university agricultural system that probably was funded by chemical companies who were selling these products. When I went to horticulture school, they told us Roundup is completely safe. In fact, you can probably eat it. They didn't recommend it, but they said if you ate it, it would do nothing to you, blah, blah, blah. And this has been disproven several times, and we know at this point that Roundup is miserable and toxic. And so we need to focus on understanding some of the things that we've learned through some solid science and where we are today. Like the Roundup thing,
Awesome.
I have a son who's got Tourette's because of Roundup poisoning.
So if we want to go, my last question here, I want to go back to the more philosophical half of this question that we kind of hand-waved away at the moment, and get your thoughts on it from an ecological and more specifically agricultural perspective of if we owe the future anything. So, can we justify the argument that we owe the future something within the agricultural frame of view? What is agriculture's justification that we owe anything to the future? What does the agricultural perspective bring to the table on that? I realize I asked the same question 5 different ways.
Well, let's just go to history. We believe we've been doing agriculture for 10,000 years. Depends which archaeologist you read, but something like that. Agriculture is the thing that has been creating civilization. And that's kind of the narrative that's accepted right now. So yeah, that's you look at the Georgic tradition. It starts with Hesiod, 700 years BC, and he teaches this relationship of mankind, and the earth, growing food in partnership with the gods, and they have their Greek gods, the pantheon of gods, and with that triangular relationship, man, earth, God, with that partnership, you could have civilization. And fast forward 700 years to the Roman poet Virgil, and so the first book was Hesiod, which is Works and Days. Hesiod was Works and Days. The second book would be Virgil's Georgics, and that's where we get the word Georgic. So Georgic is the ancient word for farming, geo meaning earth, orc meaning work. So, but the same idea. You got your pantheon of the Roman gods, you've got the earth, and you've got a human that's farming, and it creates a good citizen. And this is what the Greeks believed, and that's what they taught. They said the true harvest of the soil is not the food that you produce. It is a good citizen, a good warrior, a good military person, just a good neighbor who will keep society going. This is the same story with Virgil in the Georgics, and we see this trend in a lot of different writings. We see it in the writings of the Anglo-Saxons. We see it in the writings of the history of Switzerland. We see it in the writings of the American founding. And there's actually a lot of writing in the American founding, and that's where you can read about it the most. Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, Washington, they wrote about this a lot. This whole idea of a partnership between mankind and earth and God.
So, just question about this. How does this story and this theory about this relationship, this triangular relationship, justify the proposition that we owe anything to the future?
Well, if we want to have a civilization for our grandkids, then we owe it to the future to be good citizens today. Because I think it was the historian Will Durant, I could be corrected on this because I'm not prepared for this question, but I think Will Durant is the one who said we are only one generation away from complete breakdown of society. Meaning that we have to train each new generation in citizenship and to be a good human being, a good neighbor, and all that. So, yeah, I think we do owe it to the future if we care about our kids and grandkids, which is a very interesting philosophical discussion that could go on for 6 weeks because we see the decline in the human population. Not so much numbers right now, but as far as the birth rate. The younger generation is not having as many kids as we once had. So what will the population be in 20 or 30 years? See, here's the research that I've been doing showed that, I think it's been just the last month, the state of Utah, and I forget who they are, there's some kind of a governing something, but they decide on what gets taught in colleges. They dropped 100 career, or not career, 100 majors for colleges. They're just done. It's over. 100 majors are gone right now. Why? Because there's not enough people enrolling in college in the state of Utah. You heard that one?
I think I heard something about that.
So that's interesting. The other thing is, you look at the schools all across the country. Let's take Chicago, for example. I don't have the numbers memorized, but I saw something within the last month showing that many of the schools in Chicago have classrooms that are almost empty. And like nobody's in third grade or second grade or fifth grade. And so their teachers aren't getting hired, and they don't know what to do with the teachers they have because there's no kids to come to school because people are not having kids anymore. So it's a nightmare, you know. What happens in 100 years from now? What does the world do with not a population? So what is the ideology? I think, yes, we do owe something to the future, but do the young people who are of childbearing age, are we going to even have humans in the future? Or are we just going to stop breeding? So that's a thought, and I don't have a conclusion to that, but those are thoughts to think about.
So one last clarifying question based on that I think it'd be valuable to just put a lantern on. Do you think that it would be fair to say that agriculture's assertion that we do have a responsibility to the future is based on an assumption that society is good and that we should have children and that this is all like a good thing, that society is good? Would that be a fair thing to say, that we assume that's an assumption that underlies this?
Yeah, I know hundreds and hundreds of people in agriculture, and they all believe in families. They all believe in that the world is a good place. They probably see the world from a romantic point of view, meaning that there's more good in the world than bad. But I think a lot of your young people who don't come from that culture, they grow up in a world where they have the opposite of that worldview. I don't know what that's called, but they probably think there's more bad in the world than there is good. And so why would they bring children into this world, a world that's bad? And I don't know. I don't have very many acquaintances who have that worldview, so I've not had those discussions, so I can't give a good answer to what they're thinking. But yeah, I think the whole idea of the Georgic tradition and the agricultural mindset, we do see the world as a positive place, and that we do owe the world something good and beautiful in the future, and that's why one reason we work hard. We don't just work for selfishness, we work to make the world a better place. It's like the old saying, and I don't know what sage said it, but and I don't even know how it goes, something about the wise men planting trees whose shade they will never sit under. Something like that. You know, you've heard that before, probably.
I think that was Hesiod, but...
Was it really?
I was one of them ancient dudes from the Mediterranean.
It was somebody. But... And I totally butchered the thing, the quote, but that's what we need to think about. I mean, how many 80-year-olds do you know who are planting trees? I'm 52, and I planted 1,000 trees last week, me and my son. It was great. Me and Enoch went out there and planted 1,000 trees this last week. My goal is to plant 10,000 this spring, but spring's coming quick. I don't know if I can get it done before dormancy break.
Well, here's my last question to you. This has been wonderful. That's all the questions that I had ready to go. My very last thing is, do you have a message you'd like to share with the people who will be listening to this in preparation for the Socratic seminar on this question? It's a group of young people who care about whether or not we owe the future anything, and if so, what responsibilities we have.
From an agricultural point of view?
Agricultural and ecological.
Yes, I do. Stop believing the narrative of the environmental movement, because they are completely wrong, and we have proven that, start believing the narrative that we can change the climate because humans change it all the time. So that sounds like I just disagreed. But I've been changing the climate on the ranch where I am, and we are using ecological tools to do it by mimicking nature. And so, does the world need the climate changed to the better? Yes. But the narrative of the environmental movement has been humans are the problem. I totally disagree. Humans are the solution. I wrote a whole book about this. It's called Worry-Free Eating by William DeMille. Available on Amazon. Get the book and read it. The problems that are being promoted by the mainstream media are actually the solutions, not all of them, but the problems that they're saying, most of those are the solutions. If I have a desert, I can turn it into a grassland in less than 10 years with a herd of cattle that are managed properly. Because a cow poop is the perfect structure to grow grass. And we are extending the grasslands, and you can come to our ranch and see it happen.
One quick question. When you say that we need to stop believing in the environmental messaging, the part of that you were pulling out that people need to stop believing is that humans are the problem. Is that correct? I want to make sure that we're saying what you mean to be saying.
Yes, that is partly correct. Humans can be the problem, but humans are our only solution. Without humans, you have a disaster. Because there is a narrative out there that says if all the humans were dead and the animals just took over, the world would get better. That's true in what we call a non-brittle environment. But most of the land mass of the earth is a brittle environment. And the only way that we can turn that into a beautiful green paradise, lush, thriving, functioning ecosystem is with the management of a very well-educated human who knows how to do this. And I don't know any ecological classes that are being taught on how to do this, except for the one that I started, which I call the Georgic Schoolroom. Like, there's no colleges teaching this stuff. They are still teaching the narrative of the mainstream environmental stuff, and it's a problem. So yeah, but there is another clarifier here. So what I just answered, and it was kind of long, but what I answered was sometimes humans are a problem, but humans are the only solution, but they need to know what they're doing. And this is pretty new science on what to do. But the tools are not being taught in the university model yet. They haven't made it there yet. Some things are being discussed, but it's just not mainstream yet. We still have most people believing that you need to spray for weeds, and it's a good idea to have invasive species get sprayed every year. And the government pays millions of dollars to do that. And they are wrong. They're simply wrong. But go tell somebody that. Go tell your mayor of your town, oh, we're going to stop doing weeds because this guy said you're wrong. And he'll say, well, he's an idiot. Well, okay, maybe I'm before my time. I'm tilting at a windmill, I guess. So, but yeah. There's a lot of other solutions that the environmental movement is not talking about because they don't have them. The environmental movement doesn't have solutions, but they're very good at pointing out problems. And then the solutions they come up with are very tied to governmental programs that don't really work. Maybe some of them do. I've never seen one that did. I want to see an example of a government program or a university program or any program that actually builds the environment to be better. But there are hundreds of farms and ranches who are fixing their ecologies. Go watch that film I told you about, 100,000 Beating Hearts. That's one. And there's a lot of others that you could watch that show the same thing. There's, who's that lady? And let me think for a moment. Isabella Tree. Is that her name? Isabella Tree? And she wrote a book called Rewilding, or just Wilding, something like that. Here again, I'm unprepared, talking off the top of my head, but she's from England. Go watch her documentary. It was on Netflix for a while, but they removed it, and I don't know why, but you can't even watch it in the US. You can order the DVD, though. But that's one that is very beautiful. And because they had a failing farm, a dairy farm in England. I think it was like, I don't know, it was a couple of thousand acres maybe. They could do it in hectares there, so I don't really remember if it was 3,000 hectares or acres. If it was 3,000 hectares, and it was big, because a hectare is 2.5 times the size of an acre, but her husband was taught to be a farmer from the university. And so he came home, inherited this farm, and his grandpa and dad said, "Nah, it'll never work. You're just gonna lose your money. But here's the farm." He said, "Well, I just graduated. They taught me all the new stuff about farming. Let me try." So he drove it into further and further debt every year until they gave up. I don't remember the number, but I'm thinking they did that for about 13 years.
Wow.
But it was a while. I don't remember the real number. But, and then they gave up and said, "Well, it's true, we can't do it. With all the stuff I learned at university, it's not working. So let's just take a tractor or a dozer or whatever." And they knocked down all the fences on the interior of the ranch, and they turned out a bunch of animals to mimic the ancient wild animals. And like they let beavers go to do whatever they wanted to do, and there were no fences. They let out a small herd of cattle. They let out some wild horses. But all these animals were the closest modern animal to the ancient species that used to live there. They had some wild boars. They actually used Tamworth pigs to mimic wild boar. They used a wild heritage breed of cattle to mimic the ancient cattle. So that's kind of was their idea. So they just had one perimeter fence around the whole thing to keep everything in, and they just let it go wild. And all the weeds grew up, all the crazy thing. It just went crazy. Nobody was farming. It was just this wild place. But after a very few short years, the ecosystem rehabilitated itself without a human doing much, because this was one of the non-brittle environments where it does heal itself if you leave it alone. You can't do that in the arid western United States because that's brittle. So you have to manage it very carefully. But anyway, and then they started making money on it because they had the top, like they were selling, they needed a predator, and there weren't any packs of wolves there anymore because humans exterminated wolves in England who knows how many hundreds of years ago. And so the human had become the predator, and so they were harvesting meat from the boars, the cattle, whatever else. They probably didn't butcher horses, but whatever. And they were selling the meat at a premium price because now it was just wild meat, and people want that high quality meat. You know, it takes grass-fed to the next level. So that's another one. Look that one up and study that one. But there are dozens and dozens of examples like this. So Will Harris, and so he's in Bluffton, Georgia, and then you've got this lady in, I think, southern England, and I think her name's Isabella Tree. I hope that's the right name, but you can find it. Wilding is the name of her book and a documentary. So both of those are in non-brittle environments. So if you want to study somebody in a brittle environment, you have to look up Fernando Fallamore. I just got done teaching a seminar with him last month. we taught a 3-day intensive on how to manage cattle as an ecological tool to bring the deserts back, or I mean the grasslands back from the deserts. And it was good. We had like 25, 30 people, but there were 5 ranches that were there, and we set up a kind of a trial. And so for the next few years, we're going to be working with them to try to increase the number of species on these people's ranches. So this would have been in San Juan County, Utah, where this is happening, which is pretty awesome. And we have a test trial set up there as well, to see the effects of cattle being managed as an ecological tool on just barren ground, which is, it's pretty neat that what we're doing there. We also, so Fernando Falomar, look him up. The problem is he doesn't have a book and he doesn't have a documentary, but he's ranching in Mexico in the Chihuahuan Desert, and he has a neighbor named Alejandro Carrillo, and he's ranching and he's successful there. If you go to understandingag.com, you can read, it's just a short paper there, but you go to understandingag.com and then go to case studies, and under case studies you can flip through and you'll find Alejandro Carrillo's ranch and what they did there and how they increased, and they're growing more grass, and they're doing this without irrigation, and they're not planting seeds. They're simply using cattle as the ecological tool to bring the grass back into the grasslands. The other person, and who has an excellent TED Talk on this, would be Alan Savory. And he's an old guy, he's probably in his 90s now. But he's one of the world's leading ecologists. But he's in Africa. And anyway, he has a very fascinating story. But look up Alan Savory's TED Talk. It's like 15-20 minutes. Watch that, and he is using the principles that I have been promoting, although we have added in a lot of other things from the new science we've learned to what he does that make it even more successful. Because like here again, if you're going to study Alan Savory, study all of his stuff, you will have an education on Alan Savory, and it will be about 1 inch wide and about 1 inch deep. But when you add in everything that we can get our hands on, like there's about 40-50 people you need to study, maybe 70, and then you have an education that is 30 inches wide and 30 inches deep, and that's where we need to get to, and that's how we secure a beautiful future that we should have for our kids, our grandkids, our great-grandkids, because it's the right thing to do. And it's so optimistic right now. This is the most optimistic time in all of history, because we have the information that is so incredibly easy to get. We can know all of this stuff. Like people like Dr. Elaine Ingham, she just died this 2 weeks ago, which is super sad. She was one of my mentors. But her whole life work was to understand what the microbes are doing in the soil to turn the dirt into plant food. And one of the main things that she taught, and anytime anybody talks about Elaine Ingham, they always say the soil food web, blah, blah, blah. That wasn't the most brilliant thing I learned from her. The most brilliant thing I learned from her is that every soil sample taken in the world, and there may be a couple of exceptions, maybe on the salt flats in northern Utah, that might be an exception, but on any kind of normal agricultural land or an even range land, all soil samples that have been taken have 100% of the nutrients that all plants need to grow. We don't have to add anything to the soil. So why won't plants grow? Because the biology is dead. Your bacteria, fungus, protozoa, nematodes, microarthropods are dead. And we don't have very many macroarthropods. Those are more commonly known as bugs. People are scared of them. They don't like them and they want to spray. You see a spider in your house, oh, we got to get the exterminator out here. Worst thing we can do. We need to get used to living in a world with bugs. There's nothing wrong with a good bug. Now, if you have a venomous spider around, you want to do something about that. But for the most part, they're not dangerous. They're not going to hurt you. As somebody who's had an infection from a recluse or a venomous spider, yeah, that can be a problem. And I'm sorry for that, but we're doing so much more damage to the world by using these awful chemicals.
So I have one last follow-up question. I promise this is the last one. It's related to something you've been talking about and circling here, and I think that is important. A lot of what you've said would sound to the average person like you're describing environmentalism. But you were somewhat adamant that you see a large distinction between what you're advocating for with your ecological agricultural perspective and environmentalism in the public consciousness. So how would you distinguish what you're talking about, which a lot of people might recognize as environmentalism, from what you're calling environmentalism?
Okay, yeah, I have a simple answer. It's called a solution that works. What I do is a solution that works. What I'm saying in the environmentalism that doesn't work is the big fat narrative that has scared the last 2.5 generations of people to not have kids. Because, it's a problem because where is the solution? Show me the solution that a university came out with to fix the problem of a desert. We don't have it. And yet we do have a few doctors around. There's some PhD people in Europe who go to the Sahel in Africa, which is the southern border of the Sahara Desert, which is the biggest desert on Earth. And archaeology teaches us that it's a man-made desert, by the way. But the doctors are going there to talk to these people who can't read. They can't do math. They're illiterate people, yet they are pushing the desert north. They are conquering the Sahara Desert, one of the harshest places on Earth, and they're conquering it by growing plants. And yet the PhD people can't do it. It's taking the tribal mentality to be able to do it. So the PhD people are going there to study them. What are you doing so that we can help stop this massive problem on the earth? So it's not a government agency. It's not a political agency. It's not the environmental stuff that we are bombarded with in the media, because I have never even seen them come up with a solution. They say things like, oh, we have to stop the capitalist corporations from destroying the earth. That's what we hear. That doesn't mean anything. So when I walk out my front door of my house in the morning, what am I going to do to stop a capitalist corporation? There's nothing that the individual can do. But in the work that I've done, I can show anybody. If you're like 5 years old and up, I can teach you how to make the world a beautiful ecological place because you plant a garden and you take care of it. It's easy to do. One more person to study, Brad Lancaster. He has a TED Talk.
So I just want to make sure I totally understand what you're saying here. You're saying that from your point of view, the environmentalism is, your position rather, is more pro-human, almost tribal in that it's about people working together as local communities, whereas you view the environmentalism as being almost anti-human, people are the problem, more politically driven, and more bureaucratic. Is that kind of the distinction? Is that a fair characterization and simplification of the distinction you're drawing?
If you published that and said that I said that, I would say that you represented me pretty good. Let me say it this way. So, the Sierra Club is a very pro-environmental organization to try to stop all the big stuff from happening, and they're going to have this pristine, beautiful world with mountains and clear water and all the things they stand for, right? And their entire point is humans are the problem. Okay? Now, who is the opposite of the Sierra Club? It's some great big industrial complex, and they want a skyscraper that's totally green, growing all of our food, so that we can remove the destructive farmer from the land who's doing all of the plowing and destroying the land with his cattle. And this is the picture they paint. And both of those models removed the human from the land. They were both totally wrong. We need to get more humans on the land. More people on the land. That's the answer. We don't want to remove people from the land because people are the solution. And this is the whole point of the Georgic tradition. If you want crime to lower, then give people something to do where they have some meaning in life. And so kids who grow up in nature, whatever that means, and that could mean a lot, but like read Richard Louv, Last Child in the Woods, and all of his other books. Very interesting. When children grow up surrounded by nature, they are happier, healthier, more productive, less criminal humans than people who aren't. And that's just one example of dozens of research on that.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for sitting down here. Sorry for shooting so many questions at you. You weren't had any preparation for, but I really appreciate you taking the time.
It was a fun conversation. Thank you.
Of course.